Although your siblings are the ones who share our blood, they have always been obedient, unlike you. Your father sneers, his voice cutting through the luxury of the Blackwell estate like a blade. I'm telling you, either find a way to make yourself useful to the Empire or marry into the Alliance. We have raised you for too long. It's time you showed some gratitude. Tell me when you've chosen the partner, you reply, your voice steady despite the heartbreak. I'll marry, but after this, I owe the Blackwell family nothing. The rain at the gala is relentless, soaking your red satin slip dress until it clings to your skin like a second, cold layer of shame. You stand alone, tear-streaked and exhausted, as the elite whisper about the rebellious daughter who doesn't fit the family mold. Suddenly, the downpour stops above you. You look up to see a broad-shouldered man in a rain-darkened suit, his neck and hands covered in dark, intricate tattoos. Miss, our boss saw you alone and asked me to bring you an umbrella, his subordinate says. You lock eyes with Kang Ji-Hwan, the ruthless Mafia boss known as the Dragon. His gaze is intense, controlled, and inexplicably possessive. Why do I always meet you at my worst moments? You think, feeling the heat of his presence, and you probably don't even recognize me anymore. Jiang Shu, we meet again, he rumbles as you later enter the boardroom to face your fate. The one I'm marrying is you. You are a bit surprised, but you keep your armor high. A business marriage is only about interests, you tell him, trying to draw a clear line. No emotions. Ji-Hwan's jaw clenches, his tattooed hand resting firmly on the table. Yes, a business marriage is about interests, he agrees, though his eyes scream 10 years of hidden longing. He watches you walk away, his mind a storm of memories from when he first saw you abroad, the only woman who didn't look at his ink with fear. I will make you like me, he vows silently. In the Kang family, there is no divorce, only widowhood. Are you sure? He asks, his voice a low, dangerous caress as the wedding contract sits between you. I will be there on time tomorrow, you say, finally choosing the fire over the cage of your family. Little do you know, the man you think is your captor has been waiting a decade to be your shield. Hello, family. Before we proceed to the story, I would like to know where you are watching from. Kindly drop it in the comment section. Now let's continue with the story. The cold rain of soul was relentless, a pressurized weight that soaked through Kesia's red satin slip dress until it felt like a heavy, freezing second skin. Standing outside the Blackwell gala, she felt the visibility of her heartbreak, reflected in every ripple of the puddles beneath her feet. Her family had just finished their brutal honesty session, reminding her that she was a tool for trade, and that her deep, warm brown skin was a deviation from the obedient image they cultivated for their empire. The knot in her chest tightened with every light and carefree laugh that drifted from the ballroom she had just been exiled from. She looked downward, her tear-streaked cheeks and smudged mascara a silent testament to the emotional exhaustion of being the biological child who was treated like a country bumpkin. She was completely untethered, a woman whose stubborn pride had finally been broken by the realization that her upbringing was merely a debt to be repaid. Suddenly, the rhythmic drumming of the rain against her shoulders ceased. The air around her shifted, turning warm and strong as a broad shadow eclipsed her. Kesia looked up, her large, expressive eyes catching the glint of a luxury wristwatch and the dark, intricate dragon tattoos that climbed the neck of the man standing beside her. Miss, our boss saw you alone and asked me to bring you an umbrella, a voice said, but Kesia's focus was entirely on the man behind the gesture. Kang Ji-Hwan stood with an intimidating stillness, his narrow, focused eyes locked onto hers with a possessive and protective intensity that made the electricity in the air hum. He was a predator at rest, his broad shoulders shielding her from the city's noise. Kesia's body language remained tense, her posture suggesting she felt trapped but not weak. She didn't know this man, yet his presence offered a calculated calm she had never received from her own blood. When he reached out, his tattooed hand hovering near her shoulder in a gesture of restrained emotion, she felt a breath-catching jolt of recognition. Why do I always meet you at my worst moments? She whispered, the words slipping out before she could draw a clear line. She searched his intense expression for the cruel mafia boss The rumors warned about, but she only found a man who seemed to be reminded he was worth saving by the mere sight of her. Ji-Hwan's jaw clenched, his calculating precision warring with the warmth he felt radiating from the woman in the ruined red dress. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. The emotional message he sent was clear. He owned the world, but he couldn't control the visceral urge to anchor her in the storm. In that moment, Kesia realized that the invisible shackles of her family were being replaced by something far more dangerous, the raw data of a connection she had spent 10 years trying to forget. The mahogany desk between them felt like a vast, polished canyon, separating the cold luxury of the Kang estate from the emotional exhaustion Kesia carried in her marrow. The marriage certificate lay on the surface, a transactional document that finalized her sale from one empire to another. Kesia picked up the fountain pen, her shoulders tense as she looked at the ink, the same dark, permanent color as the intricate tattoos on Ji-Hwan's hand. With a hand that trembled only slightly, she signed her name, effectively paying back the debt her family claimed she owed for her very existence. Ji-Hwan took the pen from her, his tattooed hand resting firmly on the paper as he added his own signature with calculating precision. The knot in Kesia's chest tightened. The invisible shackles were now legal. She stood to leave, her red satin dress rustling in the sudden silence, but his voice, a low, grave vibration, anchored her to the spot. "In the Kang family, there is no divorce," Ji-Hwan stated, his intense, focused eyes capturing her gaze and refusing to let go. He stood, his broad shoulders visually overpowering the room, casting a shadow that seemed to swallow the light. He moved around the desk, his presence warm and strong as he closed the distance between them until she could smell the rain still clinging to his black tailored suit. He reached out, his thumb tracing the line of her tear-streaked cheek with a gentleness that felt like a calculated risk. Kesia leaned slightly away, her body language still defensive, though she could not deny the electricity that hummed where his skin met hers. "There is only widowhood," he continued, the words hanging in the air with a pressurized weight. "Do you understand, Kesia? You didn't just sign a contract for your family's survival. You signed for a long future ahead with me." Kesia looked up at him, her lips slightly parted in a mix of hesitation and a burgeoning, stubborn pride. "I know what I signed," she whispered, her voice reflecting a quiet steadiness she had been forced to learn in the fishing villages of her youth. "I am playing my role well. A business marriage is only about interests." Ji-Hwan's jaw clenched, a restrained emotion flickering in the depths of his steel-gray eyes. He hated that she viewed herself as a tool or a shield, unaware that he had spent 10 years secretly watching and waiting for the moment he could rightfully claim her. He didn't want a real couple built on interests. He wanted the woman who had once looked at his tattoos without a hint of fear. "Interests can change," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, possessive caress. "But my ownership of this marriage won't. You may have entered this room wanting to pay a debt, but you'll leave knowing you have a man who will always be here to back you up." As he opened the door for her, the message was clear. She was no longer an outcast of the Blackwells. She was the treasure of the Kang syndicate, and the exit was permanently closed. The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Kang headquarters, but the light felt cold against the calculating calm of the executive floor. Kesia walked down the hall, her shoulders tense as she navigated the intimidating stillness of Ji-Hwan's world. She was dressed in a tailored suit that felt like armor, yet her body language still betrayed a sense of being trapped but not weak. As she approached the mahogany doors of the primary office, she was intercepted by Ji-Hwan's lead administrative assistant, a woman whose upright and composed posture radiated a sharp, exclusionary frost. "Boss Kang is usually very busy," the assistant stated, her observant eyes raking over Kesia's natural curls and deep brown skin with a dismissal that made the knot in Kesia's chest tighten. "He doesn't have time to entertain unrelated people. If you're here about the Blackwell merger, you can leave the files with me." Kesia paused, her lips slightly parted in a mix of hesitation and the stubborn pride she had cultivated in the face of her family's disdain. "I am his wife," she said, her voice a quiet steadiness that refused to waver. The assistant let out a short, incredulous breath. "Madam, Boss Kang's marriage is a business alliance only about interests. You are a tool for his expansion, nothing more. Now, please move aside. I don't like others touching his things. The heavy office doors swung open with a pressurized weight, and Ji-Hwan stepped into the hall. His intense, focused eyes immediately locked onto Kesia, his jaw slightly clenched as he sensed the electricity of the confrontation. "What is the problem?" Ji-Hwan rumbled, his voice a low, grave vibration that commanded instant silence. "Boss, I was just reminding this lady that you don't like to be disturbed by outsiders," the assistant said, her tone shifting to a practiced, obedient cadence. Ji-Hwan's gaze shifted to the subordinate, his narrow, focused eyes turning as sharp as a blade. He moved toward Kesia, his broad shoulders visually overpowering the assistant as he placed a tattooed hand firmly on Kesia's shoulder. The possessive nature of the touch sent a breath-catching jolt through the room. "You were wrong," Ji-Hwan stated, his calculated precision making the words feel like a final sentence. "My things are hers to handle. My schedule is her responsibility. If you cannot recognize the madam of this house, you have no place in this company." The assistant's face drained of color, her protective alertness failing her as she realized she had crossed a line that didn't exist for anyone else. "Boss, I didn't mean to. It was an accident." "Go to HR and resign," Ji-Hwan cut her off, his dominant authority absolute. "I told you once, in the Kang family we won't take that kind of disrespect anymore, especially not toward my wife." As the woman hurried away, the silence in the hall was heavy with the raw data of a power shift. Ji-Hwan turned to Kesia, his restrained emotion softening only for her. "Happy now?" he asked softly, his eyes searching hers for the delusions of love he had carried for 10 years. Kesia looked at the man who had just dismantled a career to protect her dignity. "Having someone to back you up, is this how it feels?" she whispered. "I married you so I could rightfully have you back," he replied, his voice a dangerous, protective caress. "Do whatever you want boldly. I've got you. You can even walk sideways if you want." The air inside the Blackwell estate was thick with intimidating stillness, a sharp contrast to the orchestrated pandemonium of the city outside. Kesia stood in the grand foyer, her shoulders tense and her body leaning slightly away from the father who had spent 20 years treating her like a block of wood. Beside her, Ji-Hwan was a statue carved from stone, his broad shoulders, visually overpowering, the room as his tattooed hand rested firmly on Kesia's shoulder. "I told you to come home for dinner to discuss the merger, not to bring a predator into my house," Kesia's father barked, his voice a low vibration of unearned authority. He stepped toward Kesia, his face flushed with the stubborn pride of a man who believed his children were his property. "You've been married a week, and already you've forgotten your upbringing. You've shamed this family with your rebellious attitude." Before Kesia could draw a clear line or defend herself, her father's hand lashed out. The sound of the slap echoed through the marble hall, a pressurized weight that seemed to stop the very flow of time. Kesia's head snapped to the side, her tear-streaked cheeks flaring with fresh heat as she looked downward, conveying the heartbreak and emotional exhaustion she had carried since the fishing village. The electricity in the room shifted instantly from cold to lethal. Ji-Hwan didn't shout. Instead, he moved with a calculating precision that was more terrifying than a scream. He stepped between Kesia and her father, his narrow, focused eyes reflecting a restrained emotion that promised violence. "Do you think the Kang family is easy to bully?" Ji-Hwan rumbled, his voice a grave vibration that made the older man recoil. He reached out, his tattooed hand gripping her father's collar with dominant authority. "Dare to lay a hand on my wife in front of me again, and I can't predict what will happen to the Blackwell Empire." "I am her father," the man sputtered, his protective alertness turning into pure terror. "You were her father," Ji-Hwan corrected, his jaw slightly clenched. "But she belongs to me now. I married her so I could rightfully have her back from people like you." He leaned in closer, his tattoos signaling the danger and power of the world he ruled. "Without even asking for the truth, you hit your own biological daughter. Apologize, now." Kesia watched, her lips slightly parted in shock. For the first time in her life, The invisible shackles of her family were being shattered by a man who saw her as a treasure rather than a tool. Her father's gaze broke first. He looked at the floor, his voice a hollow whisper. I apologize, Kesia. It was my fault for hitting you. Ji-Hwan released him with a look of pure disdain and turned to Kesia. His possessive and protective eyes searched hers, checking for the raw data of her pain. I'm taking her away, he announced to the room, his voice a promise of final severance. If I find out in the future that anyone disrespects my wife again, don't blame me for being rude. As he led her to the car, Kesia realized she wasn't just leaving a house, she was finally leaving a cage. The heavy silence of the car ride from the Blackwell estate was broken only by the pressurized weight of Kesia's jagged breathing. She sat with her shoulders tense, her body leaning slightly away, as she replayed the moment her father had knelt in his own foyer. Ji-Hwan steered the vehicle with calculating precision, his tattooed hand occasionally reaching out to graze her arm, a silent anchor in her storm of emotional exhaustion. Why did you say you've waited 10 years? She whispered, her voice a quiet steadiness that finally cracked. I didn't even know you existed until the umbrella in the rain. Ji-Hwan's jaw clenched, his intense, focused eyes reflecting a decade of restrained emotion. I didn't just appear, Kesia. I've been like the moon in the fog, never able to shine into your world because your family built a wall around you. He pulled the car to the curb and reached into the glove compartment, pulling out a faded manila folder, the raw data of a history she had never been allowed to read. Inside were letters returned to sender, records of business proposals rejected by her father, and logs of tactical responses, where he had tried to reach her during her college years abroad. Kesia's tear-streaked cheeks grew cold as she realized her family hadn't just viewed her as a tool for trade. They had actively stolen 10 years of her life to keep her obedient and uncomplicated. I sent people to find you when you were 20, Ji-Hwan rumbled, his voice a grave vibration of repressed fury. Your father told me you had no interest in country folks like me. He said you were too focused on work, and that a marriage to a man with tattoos would shame the Blackwell name. Kesia looked at the dates on the letters. They were sent during her loneliest months, when she felt like a block of wood discarded by her own blood. They told me no one called, she breathed, her lips slightly parted in a mix of horror and stubborn pride. They made me believe I was completely untethered, so I would have no choice but to show them gratitude through this marriage. Ji-Hwan turned her face toward him, his possessive and protective gaze burning through her hesitation. I took the initiative to approach the Blackwells for this alliance because I was afraid I would miss you forever, he admitted, his calculating calm finally breaking. I didn't marry you to trap you, Kesia. I married you because I was the only one brave enough to take you back from the people who stole your light. Kesia leaned into his touch, her body language shifting from defensive to a raw, biological connection. The knot in her chest wasn't gone, but it had changed. She realized the regret of the past decade wasn't his to carry. It belonged to the family she was now ready to dismantle. They kept us in the dark, she whispered, her eyes meeting his steel-gray depth. But the moon finally appeared. The cold luxury of Ji-Hwan's estate usually felt like a cage of questions. But tonight, the intimidating stillness of the hallways felt heavy with the revelations of the stolen decade. Kesia moved through the shadows of the massive home, her red satin slip dress rustling softly against the marble floors as she sought out the one room she had previously avoided, Ji-Hwan's private library. She needed more than just the raw data of the folder. She needed to understand the man who claimed to have been secretly watching her since she was a girl. The library was a cavernous space filled with the scent of old paper and leather, a room where the dragon retreated to refine his calculating calm. Kesia walked toward his heavy mahogany desk, her body language still reflecting a lingering hesitation and inner conflict. On a high shelf, tucked behind a collection of leather-bound classics, she spotted a worn book, the same romance novel she had obsessively read during her first year back with the Blackwells. When she pulled the book forward, something fell from between the pages. It was a photograph, the edges curled and yellowed with time. Kesia's tear-streaked cheeks grew warm as she picked it up, her large, expressive eyes widening in shock. It was a candid shot of her in high school, sitting on a bench in the campus garden, her natural curly hair caught in a breeze as she laughed at something out of frame. She looked happy and free, a version of herself that the Blackwells had spent 10 years trying to erase. "You were always like the moon in the fog to me." A low, grave vibration sounded from the doorway. Kesia spun around, the photo clutched to her chest. Ji-Hwan stood there, his broad shoulders visually overpowering the entrance, his restrained emotion visible in the way his tattooed hand gripped the doorframe. "I used to go to the library back then just to secretly watch you sitting there," he admitted, his intense, focused eyes fixed on her with a possessive and protective light. "I was a senior when you were just a sophomore. I didn't dare to disturb you or reveal my feelings because I was afraid of causing you trouble with your family." Kesia looked from the photo back to the man she had been forced to marry. The knot in her chest finally broke, replaced by a biological connection she could no longer ignore. He hadn't just bought her. He had cherished a ghost of simplicity for 10 years while she believed she was completely untethered. "You kept this for 10 years, she whispered, her lips slightly parted in disbelief. "I kept it to remind myself what I was fighting for," Ji-Hwan replied, crossing the room with calculating precision until he stood directly over her. He reached out, his tattooed hand resting firmly on her shoulder, anchoring her to him. "I told you, Kesia, I married you so I could rightfully have you back. I've been waiting for this long future ahead since the first time I saw you smile." Kesia leaned her head against his chest, her shoulders tense no longer. The red satin of her dress was a symbol of the debt she had paid, but the man holding her was the treasure she had never expected to find. The grandeur of the Kang family banquet hall was a pressurized weight of crystal chandeliers and whispered malice. Kesia moved through the crowd, her red satin slip dress, a bold streak against the sea of conservative black silk, her natural curly hair framing a face that still bore the hesitation and inner conflict of a woman transitioning from a tool to a queen. Beside her, Ji-Hwan was a statue carved from stone, his broad shoulders visually overpowering anyone who dared to linger too long in their personal space. The electricity in the room shifted when Nangsan, Ji-Hwan's scandalous ex-girlfriend, appeared from the shadows. She wore a look of calculated calm, moving through the guests like a lingering spirit intent on sowing discord. "You don't really think he married you for love, do you?" Nangsan whispered as she cornered Kesia near the balcony, her voice a low vibration of spite. "Aji needs a wife on paper to appease his family. You're just a shield, a country bumpkin used to fill a vacancy." Before Kesia could respond with her quiet steadiness, a commotion erupted at the top of the grand staircase. A man Kesia barely recognized, a senior from her college years, was being shoved forward by Nangsan's associates. "Look at the Blackwell daughter," a guest jeered, the social shamming spreading like wildfire. "Having an affair with another man at her own husband's banquet hall." Kesia's tear-streaked cheeks grew pale as she looked at Ji-Hwan, her body language tensing as the invisible shackles of her family's reputation seemed to tighten again. Nangsan smirked, believing she had finally scared her into a widowhood of social exile. But Ji-Hwan did not react with the impulsive rage the crowd expected. He stepped forward with calculating precision, his tattooed hand resting firmly on the small of Kesia's back as he pulled a recording device from his pocket. His narrow, focused eyes swept the room with dominant authority, silencing the whispers. "In the Kang family, we don't believe in coincidences," Ji-Hwan rumbled, his voice a grave vibration that commanded the room. He played the recording. A tactical response, he had prepared the moment Nangsan had re-entered the country. The audio was clear, Nangsan promising a promotion to the senior if he helped frame Kesia to get her kicked out of the Shan family. The status irony was immediate. The monster the guests feared had proven to be the only man in the room with pure intentions. Ji-Hwan turned to the security detail, his restrained emotion turning into a final sentence. "Send her abroad again," he commanded, his jaw slightly clenched, "and never let her come back." He turned back to Kesia, his possessive and protective gaze searching hers. "I told you I've got you," he whispered so only she could hear. You can even walk sideways if you want." The knot in Kesia's chest finally unraveled as she realized that the regret of the night wasn't hers. It belonged to everyone who had underestimated the dragon's devotion. The pressurized weight of the Blackwell Empire's collapse felt like a physical chill in the air as Kesia stood in Ji-Hwan's office, watching the final stock reports flicker on the monitors. Her biological family had come to the dragon's doorstep not with love, but with a vicious demand for a bailout, blaming Kesia for the very bankruptcy Ji-Hwan had orchestrated to free her. Her mother stood before her, her observant eyes filled with a stubborn pride that was finally curdling into desperation as she realized the country bumpkin they had tried to sell was now the only one holding the keys to their survival. "How can you be so heartless?" her mother cried, her voice a low vibration of unearned entitlement. "The Blackwell family raised you for 10 years. Is this how you repay us? By letting your own blood go to the brink?" Kesia's body language remained composed, her shoulders tense, but her gaze steady as she looked at the woman who had once called her a block of wood. "Repay," Kesia whispered, her lips slightly parted as she finally found her quiet steadiness. "I already paid you. I married a man I thought was a monster just to satisfy your debt. But while you were looking for a tool for trade, you didn't realize you were giving away the only treasure you ever had." Ji-Hwan stepped forward from the shadows, his broad shoulders visually overpowering the room as he placed a tattooed hand firmly on Kesia's shoulder. The electricity in the room turned lethal as his narrow, focused eyes fixed on the Blackwells. "From the day we got married, half of all my assets belong to Kesia," Ji-Hwan rumbled, his voice a grave vibration that signaled a final, clean cut. "She has no ties with the Blackwell family anymore. You didn't treat her as a daughter, so don't expect her to treat you as parents now that your legacy is ash." The status irony was absolute. The family that had mocked her for her deviation from their standards was now begging at her feet. Ji-Hwan's calculating precision had ensured that every Blackwell asset was absorbed, not into his syndicate, but into a trust in Kesia's name. "I won't let you suffer," Ji-Hwan said, his possessive and protective gaze turning to Kesia as he ignored the people who had stolen her light. He signaled for his security to escort them out, the final severance complete. As the doors closed on the life that had tried to break her, Kesia leaned into his warm and strong presence, the knot in her chest finally replaced by the realization that she was no longer a shield for someone else's interests. She was the heart of a new era, and the man beside her had spent 10 years making sure she would never be completely untethered again. The orchestrated pandemonium of the city lights outside the grand ballroom seemed to fade as the moon in the foggy night finally illuminated Ji-Hwan's world. 2 years into their marriage, the pressurized weight of the Kang syndicate had been restructured into a legitimate empire. But tonight was not about quarterly returns or tactical responses. It was the night of the Foundation's 2nd anniversary, and Kesia stood at the center of the room, her natural curly hair framing a face that no longer carried hesitation or inner conflict. She wore a gown of champagne silk that flowed around her with quiet steadiness, her deep, warm brown skin glowing under the crystal chandeliers. Ji-Hwan stood beside her, his broad shoulders visually overpowering the crowd as his tattooed hand rested firmly and possessively on her waist. He had spent 10 years secretly watching her, and 2 years spoiling her with a protection she once thought was a trap. But as he looked at her, his narrow, focused eyes held a restrained emotion that even the most elite guests could recognize as warm devotion. He stepped toward the podium, his voice a low, grave vibration that commanded the room's absolute, intimidating stillness. 10 years ago, I believed that power was a weapon meant to keep the world at a distance, he rumbled, his Chinese letter steel, gray eyes fixed solely on Kesia. I believed a business marriage was only about interests, no emotions. I was wrong. My wife has taught me that the only legacy worth building is the one that starts and ends with her. The room went silent as the dragon of soul knelt before her, not as a cruel mafia boss, but as a man who had finally found his forever. He pulled a velvet box from his pocket, revealing a ring that caught the light like the bright moon hiding behind the white clouds. A late confession, a belated proposal, he whispered, his voice a dangerous, protective caress that echoed through the ballroom. Miss Kesia Blackwell, are you willing to spend the rest of your life with me, not as an alliance, but as my heart? Kesia's large, expressive eyes shimmered with a mix of stubborn pride and raw biological connection. The knot in her chest was gone, replaced by the realization that she was the treasure he had always intended to keep. Yes, she whispered, her voice a quiet steadiness that reached every corner of the room. As he slid the ring onto her finger, the invisible shackles of their business marriage were officially traded for a real partnership. The applause was a pressurized weight of approval, but they were already in their own world. For 10 years, she had been his moon in the fog, and tonight, the storm had finally stopped. They were no longer just husband and wife. They were finally, irrevocably lovers.